Thanks, Gabe. Yeah, I've forgotten a few times that I'm recorded. Join online in person, but we'll start with a little bit of meditation anyway. I suggest starting off with just a little bit of for each of us to do a little personal contemplation in relation to as a point from last time that also applies to to the material we're going to cover today. And so trying to start off with is a little bit different than sometimes actually. So to kind of contemplate for yourself, right? Last time we said when you there was a point about developing the legs of magical emanation or whatever that which connects the cow abiding. That the first when we did the antidotes, the first antidote was faith, right? And so in that context, one point is and faith is going to apply today also. But in this context, what faith means actually, because I think it's a confusing word. Um, but here it's like, what do you? I'm going to use the word conviction for a second, because it's a conviction. Like, what do you? So the question is, what do you have a conviction in relation to that you want to achieve? Like the inner words that you see faith in the sense of seeing value in something, right? Like, so I see value in some, in this case, a spiritual quality. You also have to have some uh, faith or trust that you're capable of achieving that quality. Yeah. And so I want to start with is just that is like so contemplating for yourself um, what qualities do I myself have that kind of conviction in? So you may say conviction or trust or faith or the word, words less important than understanding the experiential meaning, right? So a kind of inner conviction, inner commitment. That's to contemplate, so first I asked the question in general, and now more specifically, right? So do I have that kind of conviction or faith or trust uh, in the inner qualities, right? In my own, like, so in other words, do I have that kind of conviction, faith or trust that I want to develop love or compassion or bodhicitta? Right? And each of those comes from the next, right? Love is easier. From love comes compassion. From compassion comes bodhicitta. And so, like, to what extent do I have faith or trust or conviction in the qualities of love, compassion, and bodhicitta? Do I have a confidence in those practices that I can cultivate them, that doing so would be meaningful, would lead to happiness, would lead to well-being for myself and others? Right? Do I have a kind of, yeah, maybe confidence or trust in those qualities of love, compassion, and bodhicitta? So we'll just stay with those questions for a moment, right? So do I have, uh, again, if the word faith works for you, then use faith. If not, then confidence or trust in love, in compassion, in bodhicitta. And actually, you can check for yourself, right? Do I have confidence that they would lead to, that I can achieve them, that I can become more loving, more compassionate, that I can cultivate bodhicitta? Do I have confidence that it's achievable, those things? Do I have confidence that achieving them would benefit me? I should. And then do I have confidence that cultivating them would benefit others? And that kind of confidence or faith or trust is like a feel. It gets to a feeling eventually, right? Of like how wonderful it would be to cultivate, to have more love, to cultivate love. How wonderful it would be to develop compassion more, to develop bodhicitta more, right? Mhm. And eventually, those inner states, those like experiences, lead to a kind of aspiration, right? May I achieve? May I develop love? I aspire to. I want to do that. I want to develop compassion. May I do that? I want to develop bodhicitta. And can you feel a little bit the difference between like, kind of a conviction or, uh, you know, faith or confidence that it's a good thing? Then there's another, it's an inner shift, right? To, oh, so may I do that? The one leads to the other, right? First, you have to have a kind of confidence that it's something wonderful, delightful, healthy, positive. And that leads to an inner shift of like aspiring or, wishing to do that. May I do that? I want to do that. Develop those inner qualities. And then that aspiration leads to effort or joyous effort. And so again, this is, just try to see if you can have some sense of your own experience, right? Where the kind of faith or confidence in the quality of love, compassion, bodhicitta leads to an aspiration for those states, and how that can then lead to a kind of effort, joyous effort at cultivating those states. Like that's where I want to put my effort. That's where I am putting my effort. That's what's interesting. That's what's enjoyable. That's what's meaningful. That's what I want. That's what I will do. That's what I am doing. It's putting my energy there. It's like the last step, right? So just try to see, to what extent you can to play with, experiment with, you know, what is that like, right? To whatever extent I can cultivate it, to have that experience of my inner energy, my inner joy flowing towards, in this case, the cultivation of love, compassion, bodhicitta, not towards other things, because they're not what I have confidence in, trust in, right? But bodhicitta is what I have trust in, what I have confidence in. So that's where I aspire, and then that's where my energy flows, my joy, my effort. Well, we're experiencing that. Well, to the extent you can, then once I'll just recite slowly the verse of refuge and bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, to the merits of generosity and the other perfections. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So, last time we covered the four legs of magical emanation, or the four bases of spiritual power, different translations of Tibetan there. And today I think what we'll do is we'll cover, we're doing the 37 harmonies, right? So next there's two sets of five, and they kind of go together. So I think we cover them both because they're related. So it'll be like for 10, 10 of the 37 maybe. Um, so we had said before that the all the ones we've covered so far, right, which were the four close placements of mindfulness. And by the way, we're in the and for those who are following along, we're in the basic program study manual, right, that Emily Sue and Kok Wei Chung compiled, and we're up to like page 64, 65 actually. But so we covered the four close placements of mindfulness, which one begins to practice as soon as one achieves the path of accumulation, right? And then we were all the ones we've covered so far were on the path of accumulation, right? So those were the four close places of mind, and each of these are cumulative. They each one of these 37, each set of the 37 harmonies leads to the next experientially. So and then once you achieve one of them, you achieve it well on a certain level of the path, but then it stays with you all the way to Buddhahood. If that makes sense. So it's not like you stop doing it, right? But it's that once you become adept at one, you become capable of the next. And once you become capable of that one, you keep practicing it, it makes you capable of the next. So the four close places of mindfulness, right, helped one to develop the ability to do the four correct abandonings, right, which include like abandoning negative qualities and cultivating virtuous qualities in a way that's grounded in your own experience and is powerful because you are mindful of how the negative qualities lead to suffering and the positive qualities actually lead to well-being and happiness. So because you've seen that through your practice of mindfulness, you develop a kind of ability to practice the four correct abandonings. And then if you practice those well, you develop the ability to concentrate better, right? To develop calm abiding, and that leads to the four legs of magical emanation, which are states of concentration, right? So in other words, at that level, you have this ability to concentrate very deeply, to develop samadhi states, and to use that to meditate on emptiness and also to do certain siddhis, right? We talked about that last time, these kind of mystical, spiritual powers to do things to help your practice and help others. So those are all on the path of accumulation. Um, and once you've achieved the four legs of magical emanation, and you practice those regularly, and you use those to meditate on, use those concentration states to meditate on emptiness, there comes a point when you realize the next set, which are the five powers. Those are the next of the 37 harmonies with enlightenment. And so I'll read the definition from our text, and from various texts, actually. They took it from commentaries, of the five powers. So it says the definition of a power within the 37 harmonies of enlightenment is an exalted knower that is self-powered with respect to generating its result, an Arya's path. So these five powers lead to what it's saying is they have self-powered, not in the sense of independent. I want to be clear, self-powered here doesn't mean like independent of other factors. That's not the meaning here. What it means is that they're the main factor that leads one. That they have the power or the ability through practicing them to achieve the path of seeing, to achieve the path of the Aryas. And remember, just briefly, right? Arya means noble, right? Kind of best translation, I think. Noble. Some people translate it superficially. I think sometimes we translate it as transcendent, but noble, transcendent. Yeah. Um, and up to so we're now we're the person is with the five powers. You don't achieve. You don't call them the five powers until the person is has achieved the path of preparation, which is the second of the five. So you've uh, made it all the way through the path of accumulation, and you've achieved the path of preparation at this point. The person which has these five powers, and I kind of want to point out something about the process of that because it's going to relate to this thing about have the ability to generate the Arya's path. When a before so when a person even before the path of accumulation or on the path, different people are different practitioners, it happens different ways, but it's a person can gain a conceptual realization of emptiness before they enter the path or on the path of accumulation. Either is possible. Some people um, gain a correct conceptual understanding of emptiness and then enter the path of accumulation through the power of that they generate their bodhicitta, for example, this Mahayana. Because they've understood emptiness, they're able to kind of have a kind of conviction in the enlightenment, and then they achieve bodhicitta. Others achieve bodhicitta through a kind of faith, and then while they're on the path, they kind of realize emptiness conceptually. Um, and that's a very powerful realization. It's a very amazing thing to realize emptiness conceptually. And conceptually means through a valid cognizer. And so it's like the person that gains a kind of valid conceptual understanding of emptiness. And many Almonds have said that that experience in and of itself is very powerful. It's not something, even though it's conceptual, it's an extremely powerful experience that changes the person in some ways. Um, but then the person's can once you've realized emptiness, right? Then you can do something that you couldn't do before you realized emptiness, which is you can focus on emptiness and on that correct understanding of emptiness with meditative concentration, right? So you can go back to that understanding and you can meditate on it. Right? And sort of, and like a person might say, I'll try this, right? Where you meditate, where you're focusing on your breathing, right? Or you can meditate, you're focusing on an image of the Buddha that you imagine in front of you, or something like that. If somebody's realized emptiness, they can bring that realization to mind and then focus their mind on that, and that becomes their object of meditation sometimes. And actually, in the Lama Chopa, which do later today, if people feel like, that's the verse that in that text he says the verse on developing calm abiding, he says, you meditating on emptiness. So that's the way Panchen Lama teaches it in that text, or refers to it. It's one of the ways you can develop calm abiding. Um, and that's something that the person will be doing, right? This idea of meditating with meditative concentration on emptiness is something the practitioner is doing on the path of accumulation. Um, and that's wonderful practice, right? It's very powerful, and it helps the person. And then eventually the person develops calm abiding, actual calm abiding, shamatha, right? Tibetan shine, but shamatha. So I think most people might know it, calm abiding in English. And then that person can use their calm abiding, right, to meditate on emptiness. And they can stay with emptiness for hours at a time then, right? Such a person who has calm abiding, they can just bring to mind emptiness, they can practice calm abiding. If they've achieved calm abiding, they have a pliancy of their mind, and they can concentrate on emptiness for as long as they want, which would be quite wonderful. Interestingly, that's still path of accumulation. That's not yet the path of preparation. Because at that level, what the person is doing is they're bringing to mind their conceptual understanding of emptiness, and then they're making that the object of their focus. And their mind does absorb in that. But when they try to then analyze that emptiness, or double check it, contemplate it, they lose their calm abiding. The calm abiding gets distracted. Their mind wavers a little. And then they go back and they concentrate and analyze emptiness again, and their mind wavers. Then if they focus on their understanding of emptiness as it is, their mind develops the calm abiding, but they can't analyze. And so they have to develop this, and this is where the person is cultivating. I've said this before, there's a difference between insight and special insight. Vipassana is right? Vipassana is special insight. What special insight is this: the person isn't there yet, right? They have an insight into emptiness, but it's not yet Vipassana, because they can't, with calm abiding, analyze emptiness and penetrate it more deeply with their mind, right? Totally absorb their mind in a correct realization. So what the person is doing here on the path of accumulation, at the end, near the end of the path of accumulation, is with their calm abiding, which they've already achieved at that point, they're meditating on emptiness. And then they start analyzing emptiness to make sure they understand it correctly, right? To deepen their understanding of emptiness. But when they do so, their mind wavers a little. So they go back to the calm abiding and they stay with emptiness. Then when they try to analyze again, it wavers a little, right? Then they go back and they keep practicing like that. And then there comes a point where they achieve what's called the union of calm abiding and special insight. Sometimes it's a union of shamatha and vipassana. And what that is probably the verse, but there's a line that says something like at that point, their analysis of emptiness deepens it no longer distracts from their concentration. It actually deepens their concentration. And they achieve a special and what is called special insight is they achieve a special kind of experience where they're able to, by analyzing emptiness more deeply, have insight into that topic in union with calm abiding. So no longer does their concentration waver a little, but it actually deepens. And so there's a very deep experience then of realizing emptiness more profoundly and a more effective method, more effective experience. And when the person achieves that union of calm abiding and special insight in the same moment, so to speak, that's when they've achieved the path of preparation. So that's that experience of the bodhisattva person, the practitioner. And so now you start to see why they call it power, right? It's a very powerful experience. and they have a kind of powerful mind at that point. Um, and for those who are interested in such things, the power in this sense is the Sanskrit word for it is Indraya, which has the same root as the word Indra. Power, the god Indra in Hinduism. Actually, I think his name means the powerful one. So it's like that sense of So it's the same Sanskrit root or etymology or something. And so this idea, and I'm going back to the definition, right? It is an exalted knower, right? So exalted knower means of someone who's entered the path, right? It's a mind of someone who's a mental state of someone who's entered the path that is self-powered with respect to generating its result in Aryan's path. So the idea here is that when you achieve this union of calm abiding and special insight, it's a powerful experience in and of itself, and one of its main functions is it helps you get to the path of seeing, to the Arya path, the path of. And remember, in Buddhism, that's the point, right? That's a huge goal, right? In other words, I've often said that I always like this, that in Buddhism, that like, there's a term that you'll often see in sutras and in texts that says childish beings, or like childish usually is how they'll say it, or like immature beings. And I always like that an immature being is a non-Arya. So like if you look around the world at all the you know doesn't like you could be doesn't matter your age, and it doesn't matter your authority, it doesn't matter your position. If you haven't seen reality directly, you're considered immature or childish. And then once you've seen reality directly, you become a mature being. Um, uh, that's the cutoff point for being mature. But it's been, because we're at that level yet, achieved a kind of exalted state that's irreversible, and you've seen reality, and you're progressing then it's a very important milestone. So these five powers help you get there, is one point. And then okay, now there are four on the path of preparation, which we're talking about now. There are four sub-levels of that path. The first is heat, and the second is peak. Those are the first two.
Wait,
Heat,
what's the first one?
heat, and it's like you could say, you're understand now. You're really heating up on you're like your ability to understand your progress on the path, and your ability to understand reality is heating up now. You're getting hot. Like you're going. Uh, and then the next one is peak, like the peak of a mountain. Like the top. Um, so and it's going to become important because the next five are the second. So those two levels are where you achieve the five powers, and those continue on after that. Um, and then another point I want to make in general, which is going to be important in terms of the next five, which are the five strengths, is one quality when you achieve the five powers is that while you're in, because you have a union of calm abiding and special insight, right? While you're in meditative absorption, does that make sense? So if you sit down and you enter this kind of calm abiding state where you're having special insight into emptiness, while you're in meditation, um, there's a term here they use. You cannot be overcome by the opposites of we're going to get into what are the five powers in a minute, but you will not be overcome by their opposites. So that means while you're in equipoise meditation, um, the mental afflictions can't control your mind. So you have a kind of peace. And we're going to go through the five powers now. But so one is faith, which is what we just talked about, meditate on. So you can't, in other words, while you're in meditative absorption on the power of faith, you will not have any non-faith. It can't arise for you. While you're on the power of joyous effort, you can't experience any laziness. While you're on the power of mindfulness, you can't have any forgetfulness. You will forget your object of meditation. While you're on the power of meditative stabilization, you will not get distracted at all. And while you have the power of wisdom, there will be no ignorance. So you can't, while in meditation, be overcome by the opposite factors. And if you meditate now, you may actually, so I'll share something personal reflection about these five powers that I find, five powers and five strengths that I found reassuring in a way, is you may have had this experience, I certainly have, where you sit down to meditate and you do get distracted. You get distracted, right? Or you get lazy and tired, or you get, and And sometimes, actually, it helped me when I studied this text, this topic, because I remember I was like, sometimes I would think, oh, that's not like it's a little discouraging. Like I'm trying to meditate and I'm tired and I can't focus. And then I was studying this and I was like, oh, okay. Until you get to the path of preparation, that's normal. In other words, what they're saying is, until you're at the path of preparation, that's going to happen. Once you get to the path of preparation, when you sit down to meditate, that will no longer happen. You have pliancy, right? And you have this ability to have calm abiding and special insight and union. And so at that level of the path, when you sit down and meditate, nothing will stop you from overcoming the antidotes or the ill disposing factors to meditation. And so then I thought, oh, okay, so it's normal that I was still having these difficulties, challenges in my meditation. Um, but when I get to that level, they won't arise anymore. So let me try to get to that level. Let's make effort, and so on. So that I found that helpful. And another point that I find interesting, which we'll get more into in a minute, is in these two levels of the path of preparation, heat and peak, the first two, where you have the five powers, you don't yet have the five strengths, which are the next five. And there's an important distinction that they draw, which I find interesting and helpful, which is at this level, I said, when you sit down to meditate, those obstacles can't arise, right? They don't arise experientially. You overcome them easily because you have the five powers that you can overpower any kind of obstacle to meditation. But in the breaks between meditation, when you're out, you get up and go have lunch, or you go talk to somebody, and the obstacles still can arise. They still experience you still experience those when you're not in meditation. You can't hold those powers outside of the meditation session. That's the difference when you get to the patience and the next two levels of the path of preparation, where you have the five strengths, is then even in the breaks, you can't be overcome by those obstacles. So again, if you have the experience walking around and suddenly finding yourself in a mental affliction and you think, oh, why is it still like this? Then you can know, well, it's because I'm not yet at the patience level of the path of preparation. I got to get there. Let's get moving, because when I get there, then even when I'm walking around and somebody does something that you ordinarily would have bothered me, I won't experience those kind of inner obstacles because I'll have a power, a strength of mind, right? But I don't yet have that strength because real strength of mind comes from these experiences of calm abiding and special insight. Okay. And then the next point, I should actually go through what are the five powers. And by the way, I want to say in advance, here it's going to be the power of faith is the first one. The five strengths have the same names. So then it's going to be the strength of faith. So they're the same qualities, but more or stronger, if that makes sense. So they're not, that's why I can cover them together. I think it makes sense. But okay, so these five powers, right? It says here, these five powers, which are paths that prepare for the clear realization of the true nature of existence, means the direct realization of essence, right? So they're powerful in the sense that they're helping us progress towards the direct insight into emptiness. They're also powerful in the sense that they overcome the obstacles while you're in meditative session, right? Um, so the first of them is the power of faith, which is a conviction. I mentioned that word earlier, conviction or confidence regarding the Four Noble Truths. And so here, remember, this is what we just meditated on, right? Here, what happens is you have a kind of conviction or a confidence in the Four Noble Truths. Um, and I want to point something out, right? Because faith also was there at the earlier phases, right? If you remember, right? Faith was one of the antidotes, into cultivating, for example, the four legs of magical emanation. And the commentaries point out uh, each level of the path. This is an important point, actually. As you progress on the path, your conviction changes, your confidence changes, your faith or trust, or is your those are all synonyms, right? When you say faith, I sometimes hesitate with the word faith because it has kind of connotations that I don't think are intended here. But I'm not sure which word's best. So the point here is that and it's only Dalai Lama points this out sometimes. So I just want to mention that he points out. I think it's in the Sakya Lamdri teachings they explain this. That he's only used this presentation where he says he makes a point which is like, how do I say it the right way? This kind of confidence, I'm going to call it, has to be based on both reason and experience. And if you hadn't had a certain kind of experience yet, then you can't have a certain kind of confidence yet. It's just not possible, right? No matter how, you could be a very kind of, and that's where like that's an interesting point. It's not about sort of blind faith or a leap of faith or what they're getting at here is like through reasoning you can get to a certain point in terms of conviction, but that's not the same as when you've had an experience, right? And what His Holiness points out is each level of the as you experience different levels of the path, your conviction, your confidence will become stronger. And in one commentary, they point something out. Like here, you have the power of faith, which is very powerful. It's very different because you've achieved the union of combining and special insight. So it's much more powerful than you had before you entered the path or when you're on the path of accumulation. But one commentator said, but it's not the same as the faith or conviction of a person who's achieved Arya's path. They can have a different level of faith because they've seen it directly, right? They've seen reality directly. Their confidence is going to be more powerful. Does that make sense? And so again, it's like it's very these points are very experiential in that sense, right? It's like as you have certain experiences, your ability to give rise to a confidence in your own practice of the path increases, right? And if you achieve further things, then and it's like getting closer and closer also to the goal. You can see, oh, I can, you might say, oh, I believe I can achieve Buddhahood, but you don't know that in the same way somebody who's on the fifth bhumi knows that. Does that make sense? Because they're much closer, so they know what what it takes and what it's like, and they have more of a taste of that, and so on. And so as we progress, we develop at different levels. So here you develop a faith that when you sit, so that's so powerful that when you sit down to meditate, nothing can, there's nothing that can arise that will shake your faith while you're in meditation. When you get up and you get distracted, it's not quite that powerful yet. Does that make sense? But it's powerful enough that when you sit down to meditate, you have a kind of conviction or trust in your own practice because you just yesterday, let's say, experienced again the union of combining and special insight. So when you sit down to meditate, oh, I can get back there, and that, and the experience of that it's so peaceful, so powerful, so transformative that it's a kind of conviction, right, based on your own experience. That somebody who says, "Oh, that'd be a wonderful state," they can't have that same level of conviction, right? That same level of confidence. So that's the power of faith. Right? Here, faith is the first of the five, leads to the second, which is the power, and each of these leads to the next. Does that make sense? Each one leads to the next one. So the power of faith leads to the power of joyous effort, right? So that person, and but I want to be clear, these are not like, oh, you achieve the faith once and then you achieve the joyous effort once. And this is like over and over again. These go together. So like the person sits down to meditate, right? I'm just giving an example. The person at this level of the path sits down to meditate and they have a conviction, a faith, a conviction. I know I can achieve the union of common body with special insight because I did. I did it 3 times yesterday when I was meditating, right? And I did it the day before, and I know what that experience is like. So they have a kind of faith, right? They know the incredible bliss and joy and peace of that and how transformative it is, right? And that it's leading them to the Arya's path. So that leads to joyous effort for them, where they think, yeah, I'm going to start my meditation session, right? And they immediately have a kind of joyous effort for meditating, uh, where they feel enthusiasm and joy and energy for that. And that joyous effort leads to the third of the five powers, which is mindfulness, which means that person doesn't, because they have that kind of joyous effort and that conviction, they don't forget their object of meditation the way we might, like if you sit down to meditate, sometimes it'll happen, right? You'll be thinking, oh, I want to focus on bodhicitta, but then like you think, oh, I forgot to pay my bill, right? Or whatever. Uh-oh, whatever. That's forgetting, right? That's forgetfulness, right? You get your mind totally forgets the object and you're on some other object. You're not mindful anymore. That doesn't happen for this person because their level of joyous effort, um, and actually it's like that, isn't it? When you have really joyous effort about something, you don't forget it. It's like what we forget are the things where it's like we don't really. And actually, do you see the connection here, by the way, psychologically, right? If you don't have that much confidence in something, I used this analogy last time, I think it was about these joyous effort, like, and it's an analogy because it's not spiritual at all, but like, um, let's say like uh, those gymnasts who win like many gold medals, right? They stay when they're on the floor, they stay mindful of what there's no forgetting of mindfulness, right? They don't have a moment of, oh, I wasn't mindful of what I was doing when they're in the Olympic Games, right? There's not a second where they're not mindful of what they're doing because they have joyous effort at that activity, right? And so what we're getting here is this is a normal connection, right? That conviction or confidence leads to a joyous effort, which leads to a mindfulness, right? You don't forget your object. But so the person is, or the person who's playing, say playing in Carnegie Hall and the piano, they're not going like, oh, I forgot to play that note because I was thinking about my whatever plans for tomorrow, right? Because they having like what's the word? They value piano. Somebody at that level of playing value puts great value and puts great confidence and puts great. Anyway, you get the point. So here that you're like that meditation. Does that make sense? You're the virtuoso of meditation. um, and the mindfulness leads to the fourth, which is the power of meditative stabilization, right? Which is like their samadhi, right? Their concentration, which is single-pointed focus on the Four Noble Truths. And that leads to wisdom, the power of wisdom, which discriminates the mode of abidance of the Four Noble Truths, which includes emptiness, but also the other noble truths as well, right? So do you see how these go together? This one, and each one over and over again. It's not like, oh, I achieved faith at the beginning and now I don't need faith anymore. It's each, as the person's going through their practice on these levels of the path, they again give rise to that kind of faith or confidence, and then they again start to practice joyous effort, and they again develop, so on, concentrate, mindfulness and concentration and wisdom.
So this is very cyclic.
Yep.
I understand it. Like, if you get there, you're just beginning, and then it'll consistently appear one way or another. How? And when we talk about samsara, we talk about cyclic. So is this a different kind of cyclic existence?
Yep.
Forced from samsara, or
so Jan was asking, is this like this is a cyclic process? So is it different from the cyclic existence, the samsaric process, right? So a couple points. One is the person at this level of the path still is within samsara, is one point.
okay.
So they're still in samsara, but one point is they're developing the antidote to samsara at this point, right? There is that understanding of the Four Noble Truths in general and of emptiness in particular is the antidote to samsara, which they're cultivating, but they haven't yet freed themselves. They're getting closer and closer to freedom from samsara, is one point. And then one other point, though, is worth thinking about in that context is, I've said this before, like, actually the word gom, which we usually translate Tibetan word gom as meditation, really means familiarization.
Mm-hmm.
And Shantideva made a point in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, where he says, everything becomes easy through familiarization. Anything becomes easy through familiar. So this, in a way, this virtuous cycle, you could call it, is familiarizing ourselves more and more deeply with the Four Noble Truths in general and emptiness in particular among them. So that they become easier and easier to understand, which eventually liberates us from samsara. But you're not yet liberated at this level, right? Because you're on the path of preparation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. And oh yeah, Gabe has.
Are these because every time I'm thinking about the 5 powers, are these the same 5 powers that are taught? I recall a video from Rinpoche where he teaches the 5 powers, but it's more like a power of resolution, the power of the white sea.
Yeah, those are different. No, those are from Lojong. Those are Gabe was asking about the 5 powers in Lojong. And those are a different set of 5 that are specifically taught in Lojong. I mean, you can see connections to these. You have to.
I was trying to see.
You can see some connections in the sense of they're a similar process, but it's a different teaching actually from Lojong. That's a mind training teaching that's not the same teaching as this. I mean, and those are specifically for cultivating bodhicitta. Also, these are the Four Noble Truths in general, whereas those 5 powers are specifically about how to cultivate bodhicitta, train your mind in bodhicitta. Again, they are connected because you could see ways to connect them, but it's a different teaching because here it's one point is it's a different list of 5, but the other is here the focus is on all the Four Noble Truths, where it's there specific to bodhicitta.
Gotcha. Now I have another question. So when you started with just the 5 powers, is the experiential part the strength? And the five powers are cultivating an understanding? I mean, are the first set of five experiential or are they conceptual?
They're experiential, yeah, for
Okay.
sure. Yeah, so these are experience like where the person. So the idea here is not is like these are not these are experiential experiences where the person if you and again if you go back and imagine, right, so the person who has achieved the just say let's say the heat level, which is the first part of the path of preparation, like that person now they've achieved the union of combining and special insight experientially, right, which is a amazing experience, you know, it's like humongous experience for that person, right. um and so now when they and really it's getting at these five powers are really about the meditation session mainly, right, so it's like now when that person sits down to meditate, they have a different level of conviction in the Four Noble Truths, right? Because they've had a union of combining and special insight, their insight into the Four Noble Truths is much more powerful than anybody who hasn't achieved that experience. And so because they've had that union of combining and special insight, understanding the Four Noble Truths, their conviction in the truth of the Four Noble Truths and in like which right the Four Noble Truths means the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause, so like we might say, oh yeah, I can sort of see that, like somebody, an ordinary person might go, oh, I can kind of see how craving is a problem that leads to suffering. Yeah, sure. But actually if you're honest, right, if you look at like oneself, right, yes, that's pretty clear, right, or hatred leads to suffering. But in terms of conviction, right, if somebody says, well, which is the main cause of suffering, like is it really the mental afflictions, or would it be like having a financial problem crisis? You might say, "Oh, well, having a financial crisis, that'd really be upsetting." If I have some anger and craving, yeah, that's not good. I'd like to overcome that. But a financial crisis in my life would be very bad. That's much more serious, right? Uh, there's not the same level of conviction. Whereas the person at this level of the path, right, who has the conviction, the Four Noble Truths, uh, actually, I remember once Ken Rinpoche saying that to me. He said, "Oh, once you've had some kind of experience of emptiness in the Four Noble Truths, he was like, if your house burns down or you lose all your money, you feel, who cares? That's not important. As long as I didn't develop mental affliction, like he was saying that, he said like that person, if they started to get angry, they would feel, oh, this is a crisis. I have to do something. But he said that, he gave an example. He said if they lost all their money, they would feel, oh, that's no big deal. So what? It's not that important. That's not the cause of suffering. Cause of suffering is my own mind. Suffering is an experience that, because they would have this level of, that's what we're talking about, conviction.
Okay.
So he says, so they have a kind of conviction in the Four Noble Truths like that. And when they, and if they can, and, same thing, like, if, like you might feel, oh, generating some love, that's a good thing, but like, let's say, but if you won the lottery, which would you feel more excited about? If tomorrow somebody came and said, oh, here's the ticket, you won the lottery, or if somebody said, oh, you developed a little more love for 5 minutes, you would say, well, you might say, oh, the love thing's great. Give me the ticket. Uh, whereas this person at this level of the path, their conviction is like that. Like in other words, where somebody said, oh, here's the winning lottery ticket, they might, they would not, wouldn't be that very, wouldn't have much meaning to them. But if they could cultivate more love, they would feel, oh wow, before I died, I cultivated more love. That's very precious. So they have a kind of conviction. That's what I'm talking about. Experience of,
Okay.
and then you can see how that leads to joyous effort, right? Whereas where if you give them some opportunity to do something unrelated to the path, like it's like, it's like if you go to the person again who's like, if you went to what's the word, the gymnast who's about to go on the floor to try to win the gold medal, and you said, "Oh, here's a bucket of fried chicken." Want to put, they would say, "Get away from, like leave me alone. I'm not interested." They would have no interest at all, right? I'm just giving a silly example. That would be like this person for, and yeah, Lama Zopa used to talk about that, his experience like that, where he would say, like, if somebody, like he would say, like, when somebody offers like some worldly experience, it's like he was trying to give an analogy to ordinary people's, and he said it's like if somebody offered you a bowl of poop, you would feel like, it's just not interested. It's like it smells bad and it's not interesting, and I'm busy. You leave me alone. Kind of is the like that worldly distractions. The person that's the kind of faith the person has, right? It's a conviction of faith based on their own experience, where it's like what matters is, and I remember one day I was talking to a friend of mine, Venerable Renee, that was a wonderful monk. And he was saying something about he was talking about we were talking about his meditation house. He has built a little house in the wilderness to meditate. He lives there year round mostly, except for if he's teaching every now and then. But he made a point that I just thought was interesting, where he was like, oh, if somebody sent him something and there was a new thing in his house, like somebody sent him a package, and then there was like an object. And he said, then he would know. I found it funny actually. He was saying like just a new, like, so somebody sent, he lives remote in a remote part of Washington State, but you say if somebody sent a package and then there was a new object, then of course when you pass by the object, your eye goes there and your mind goes to the object, right? And then your mind goes, oh, that's a new whatever, it's a new hat, whatever, that that's a moment of distraction from practice. He was like, oh, I don't want anything new in my. He was like, so he would actually throw it out. He would like, and it wasn't because it wasn't, and you get the like, it wasn't some kind of self negation or oh, I'm not good enough, or it was I feel, I don't, he didn't say this part, but it's like if you feel this kind of conviction, this kind of joyous effort, this kind of, and the bliss of the experience of the path, anything that even for a moment takes you away from that is actually causing you suffering, right? Um, it's that's relative, it's not that having a hat is a suffering, but it's like relative to the state of the path, that's a distraction that's not as good, because my mind is on something else. So he was like, I want the environment as simple as possible so that all my mind is on is the path. And again, it's not like because I'm some ascetic, and let me notice that it's because of these qualities, right? Joyous effort, where you don't want, it's like anything else is a distraction. And if you were, and that's an example where if you're on this level, the five powers, right, you can't yet suppress all the obstacles outside of session. So they would be an obstacle then, right? For you, where they would distract your mind for a moment. And you don't even want a moment to lose, right? Because that's, like the pianist or the gymnast, or I'm giving you analogies here, where you want to keep going because you can get to the next level, right? Um, and that connects, so now I'll jump to there. So the five strengths have the same names, right? They're the same processes. Uh, but here I'll give the definition of a strength of the completely pure class within the 37 harmonies of enlightenment is an exalted knower that cannot be surmounted or overcome by its discordant classes, right? So now this person who gets and these are at the patience level and the supreme mundane dharma level. Those are the second two levels of the path of preparation. And on those levels, the person has strengths which are even stronger than the powers, right? So they're the same strength, they're the same states now, but this person, uh, even when they get up, right, and walk around, they don't experience any non-conviction or faith. They don't experience any laziness. They don't experience any forgetfulness. They don't experience any distraction, and they don't have any corrupt wisdom or wrong understanding. Right? Those things do not arise. They're not yet, and important. So there are a couple of important points here I want to make. One is they haven't yet achieved a permanent cessation of those, or is that that's like, but it's through the power. Their mind is so strong that as long as they keep practicing, their mind is getting stronger and stronger, and they can't be overcome. Like a you know, they say foe destroyer, right? They like an arhat is a foe destroyer. They say they overcame the inner enemy, right? Here it's like the person is not yet an arhat, but they have a kind of strength of mind where there is the mental afflictions can't overcome them as long as they keep practicing. And then eventually they're going to achieve a cessation. But here it's not a permanent cessation yet. It's that their mind is so strong that it can't be overcome by those negative states. Then I wanted to share in this context um, a personal reflection for a second about the teaching. So this is my own reflection, but I think it's based. I actually double checked numerous commentaries to make sure I wasn't off track. But oh, by the way, these are the five strengths in Sanskrit is bala. That's like strength. So in Sanskrit, but these begin on the path of patience. The patience level of the path of preparation. And I wanted to say something about the patience level for a second, because in the teachings in general, it's taught that there are three. Now this is stepping back not from this topic, but in general, there are three types of patience. So here we're talking about this is achieved on the patience level of the path of preparation. So I thought, why is it called the patience level? And so there are three types of patience in general in Buddhism, and this is mainly referring to the third. But the first type of patience is the patience in relation to harm. So that's where like somebody's harming you or you don't like what they're doing in the world. And instead of getting angry, you're patient, right? So like it might be you hear the news and you don't get angry. It might be that a friend or a coworker or or your somebody you live with does something that annoys you and you're able to be patient, right? That's that meaning. The second type of patience is patience with regards to bearing hardships in the practice. And that's where like, sometimes it's not easy to do your practices, and to face the challenges of studying or meditating or learning or doing the various things that you do to progress on the path. So the second kind of patience is where you say, that's okay. I don't mind obstacles. I don't mind some challenges. I'm trying to achieve something meaningful. And so you have a kind of patience that can bear the challenges. I think this patience here is the difference to the third one, which is I think patience is a kind of funny word in English. I think it's a challenge partly because of the word choice. But here, there are some texts that talk about the patience from the recognition of the nature of things. There's some sutras that call it the patience. They call it the patience that can, the patience with regards to the unproduced, meaning emptiness. Or in the Lamrim Chenmo translation, they call it the patience of certitude about the teachings. Um, but I just wanted to share a reflection about that. I was looking in the Lamrim and I was looking in the Lamrim Chenmo, and I was also looking in the Bodhisattva Bhumi, where Tsongkhapa in the Lamrim Chenmo says, if you want to learn more about this, look in the Bodhisattva Bhumi. And Art Engel, friend, translated that. So I was looking at that too. So I just wanted to share a reflection, which is because I think it's a funny word. So I think people sometimes get confused about this one. But I want to give a mundane, that's about Dharma, but I want to give a mundane example for a second. And then you'll think like, here what's being gotten at, I think, I'm pretty sure, actually, it's true, is they're calling it patience, but it's like, actually, I'll share, okay, I'm going to do a little bit roundabout for a second way of explaining it, but I always, because I work as a psychologist, I remember when I was watching, the first time I saw the movie The Matrix, the original Matrix movie, there was a scene I loved. And it was a scene where the main character, Neo, goes in and he meets with the Oracle and she tells him all these things about his future. And he starts getting upset. And then she says to him something, I'm not going to remember the exact words, but she essentially says, here, have a cookie. And she gives him a chocolate chip cookie. And she says, don't worry, just enjoy your cookie. And by the time you finish that cookie, you'll think, oh, I don't believe any of that crap. And you'll forget all about it and you'll feel fine. And she knows that she just told him the truth, but he's not going to be able to sustain it. Right? He's going to forget it, and then it'll come back to him later, of course, because things will happen. But she knows that, right? She knows he's not going to hold on to what's true, and she tells him that, and he does, and he forgets temporarily. And and then I'll make a point about being a psychologist. Like as a psychologist, I've had thousands and thousands of moments like that, right? Where a person's in a therapy session and they see something, and then I know, oh, this person's not going to they're not yet ready. They're going to lose that awareness, but maybe they'll come back to it, and I can bring it up again. And if I bring it up, in many times, then eventually maybe it'll become clearer to them, and they'll be able to sustain it. But having a moment of seeing the truth of something doesn't mean you can keep it. And then I'll share my own. Then as I reflect on that, I remember I've had so many, gosh, too many moments like this. But I remember many times with Lama Zopa I would have these moments where he would be saying something, teaching, and I would like have some experience because he was teaching it, and he was teaching in a very experiential way, and I would have some experience. And there came a point at first I would think, oh wow, this is it. And then I would like, as soon as he stopped, as soon as I was away from him, I would lose the experience. And then there came a point where I was like, he'd be teaching and I would have some experience and I would know, oh, I wish I could stay in this experience, but I know it's through his power, not through mine. It's like it's through the power of his realization and my being in his presence, I'm sort of being lifted up to a kind of level of awareness, but I know once he sleeps, I'm not going to be able to keep this up. Let me try. Let me try to remember it. Let me try to cultivate it. Um, let me try to stay there and habituate myself to it. But I could almost feel it slipping away as he would, do whatever. Uh, and That's normal. And my point, so I'm saying, the reason I'm bringing this up is that's a normal thing, right? We all have that. You can have an understanding of something, and even like in normal life, right? You may gain a certain insight into something, and then like later you go, oh wait, why didn't I like I should have known that, or I sort of knew that. Why didn't I change my behavior? Why didn't I? Well, I knew it for a moment, but I old patterns or old whatever's overcame me, and I stayed in whatever I didn't sustain the wisdom, right, of whatever I was seeing. That's normal, right? So patience in this sense, right? The patient, or whatever, there's different translations were here. Patience is a funny word, but what's getting at is the ability to stay in, right? That you can act, and again, it's a relief to me personally, and as I hope it is for you, to understand that there are many different kinds of patience. Actually, if you look at the teachings of the path, and this is one of them, we're getting it. That's why I'm talking about it now. Is at this level of the path of preparation is one of the levels, but there are many levels because where you achieve a new patience, they say. So here at the patience level of the path of preparation, you achieve a new patience. What does that mean? It means a new ability to hold awareness of a truth, even when you're not in meditation on it, for example. And that will happen over and over again at different, on the and the third bhumi, you achieve a very profound level of patience. And yeah, oh, yeah, patience. Yeah, so on the third bhumi, I think it is. Also on the path, there are certain points in the path of accumulation where you achieve new levels of patience. Anyway, my point is, it's an ability to hold an awareness, and part of the thing I find relieving is, well, of course you're going to forget it then until you get to that level, right? And then I was going to share in the um in the Bodhisattva Bhumi, right, which is a text by Asanga. Um, it says certain things like he calls it a patience of conviction that is gained by reflecting on the nature of things. It arises from repeated careful consideration. The great patience comes from recognition of the nature of things, and it's a form of wisdom. So the point, and Tsongkhapa says, the patience of certitude about the teachings means generating the forbearance of conviction. Again, it's like funny word choices, I think, in English to get it experience. But what's being really gotten at oh, this is the line I want to share. The way to have such patience and conviction is to become certain about these objects just as they are, and then to think about them again and again, apprehending them without conflict. And Ken Rinpoche explained a little more about that, so I'll share. What Ken Rinpoche got at was, how do you develop the ability? And this is why I told the story earlier, right, about whether it was myself, with Lama Rinpoche, or my own experience trying to be a therapist or whatever, is it's repetition, and it's addressing the doubts, right? So what you have to do is, whether it's for yourself or for somebody else, how does anybody develop this kind of patience or conviction? Is It's not enough to see the truth of something once. You go back to it over and over. You keep reminding yourself, and you keep trying to see it differently. And then you actually intentionally give rise to you bring up your own doubts about the truth of what you saw. And you say, well, wait a second, is there anything I could do? Do I have any unconscious hidden doubts about that? What are they? Let me address them. Let me check. Is it, if I have them, great. Let me address the truth of them. Let me see, and I was doing that recently been reading a book about emptiness. I intentionally read it because I don't agree with parts of it. I was like, okay, I'm going to keep reading it because I want to see why don't I agree with those parts. And it's by a great Buddhist teacher, but I was like, well, if I can't figure out why I think he's wrong, then I don't know. And my understanding is not that good, like, because I get to a point, I'm like, well, he's saying this is true of emptiness. That's not what I think, and he's saying Nagarjuna means this, but Lama Tsongkhapa, I think, says Nagarjuna means that. Well, why is Lama Tsongkhapa right? Or am I wrong? Or do I know? And, so the point is you have to address your doubts and then get back again and again to your experience of something, right? And then you develop a patience that can hold the awareness and that can influence your behavior, right? So now I want to go back. Do you see how now in the earlier part of the path of preparation, right, the first two levels, you're repeatedly going into this experience of the union of calm abiding and special insight. And when you're in that experience, mental afflictions and obstacles can't arise. But when you come out of it, right, like the character with the cookie, right, you forget a little bit. things distract you, right? And suddenly you're like, you know, get distracted, you get off track a little bit, and you have to come back. Now such a person is on the path of preparation. They're quite a great practitioner, so they'll go back to their session. But let's say something happens, they have to leave that place, and then there's all kinds of problems, and they have, there's political unrest, and they have to leave the region. This happens in history, right? Well, then, all kinds of other obstacles can arise for them. It's hard to get back there, right? But if they can get to the situation where they can keep cultivating, right? Then they get to this level of patience, level of path of preparation, where even when they're outside of the session, nothing can overcome their mind is so strong that nothing can overcome it. Frank has his hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. So this definition of patience under the five, as being able to hold on to levels of awareness to realization for longer and longer periods of time, is that also part of the perfection of patience and the six perfections? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's one of the part. Yeah, if you think about the perfection of patience, it's all three of those types of patients I just mentioned. And so actually in Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chenmo, I was quoting from actually your friend's, he right, Joshua was the editor-in-chief of this translation committee. It's that section actually I was quoting where Tsongkhapa says there are three types of patients, and he goes through all three of the three I just mentioned, and then and that's where he gives a um, presentation of this type of patients, and he says this is one of the three types of patients that the bodhisattva has to practice in the context of the six paramitas, and um, and he actually lists 8 objects of patience for that person, and so on. He goes into more detail. It comes from the Bodhisattva Bhumi. That's where he took it from. But yeah, so he specifically teaches it in the context of the six perfections. Tsongkhapa does in that section of the Lam Rim. Yeah.
Thank you.
And does that make sense though about this idea of I just wanted to pause there because I just think I don't know. I think it's hard to for me. It's been I guess I'm like myself. For myself, it was hard to really grasp that idea of what that third type of patience is and how it relates to the path. But do you see how that's like? Do you see how that's what's the word related to normal experience, right? Like where we all have that about anything, any topic we're trying to understand. It's like maybe with certain topics you just get it and you're fine, but there are many times where like it really is hard to hold the awareness of something. And it only then comes about through familiarization, through seeing it very clearly, and through addressing your own doubts, right? And doing that over and over again. And then you can develop this patience with regards to the truth of something. Which I don't know, that's what they're calling it. Conviction, maybe, I don't know what, an ability to hold it. You get the meaning now. And I want to share now, oh, and here in the Bodhisattva Bhumi, he says there are two causes of such patience. One is repeated practice over a long period of time in regards to that thing. And the second is attainment of a very pure, perfect knowledge of that thing. And that those two things, so like attaining a very pure, very precise insight into a topic or knowledge of a topic, and then repeatedly over a long period of time familiarizing yourself, you'll become more and more able to integrate. And I also think, and that's another English word I would use is, you know, Pabonkaram in his Lamrim, I always like this. It's funny. He says, there's a certain point where in regards to practice where joke, he says, it's like a badly made soup where everything's floating around on the top and nothing's integrated. So like if you have a soup where like the noodles aren't really cooked through and they're floating here and then there's a vegetable floating there and whatever, it's not a very good soup. And he says what you want is a soup where everything is cooked well and integrated and the flavor is singular in a way. Um, and so there's a kind of integration. And I think this patience is like you can integrate a knowledge into yourself in a certain way, right? Where it becomes part of your way of being, whereas otherwise it's floating on top and it's not really integrated into your way of experiencing the world. And here you have that in regards to the Four Noble Truths. Does that make sense? So when you get to this level of the path of preparation, your understanding the Four Noble Truths is now cooked in. So that remember the first level was heat. You're heating it. It's like you're cooking. You're cooking your experience and then peak, and then now you've got to patience. Now it's like it's a well cooked soup in a way where it's integrated into you. And even when you get up from your cushion, even when you're walking around, it's like that. And then, oh, go ahead.
Like gel.
Yeah,
gels.
yeah, gels, exactly. It gels into your experience very deeply. And and I want to make two more points in regards to these things. I think hopefully just to be hopefully useful. Another one is like, I don't think this happens as much. Maybe I don't know. Sometimes in the context of um, Buddhism, actually, Buddhist practitioners sort of, uh, sometimes in psychology they talk about spiritual bypassing, sort of avoiding real, sort of pretending you're more advanced than you are and ignoring real issues that and or sort of, or pretense also is another point here. And I want to make a point, which is like, so my point is like sometimes there could be I think I've seen it actually happen to myself, and where there could be like I don't know, like I think it comes out of a sincere start, but a kind of pretense of sort of wanting to pretend you're more advanced in the path than you are, and wanting to seem like you're more peaceful than you are, wanting to seem like nothing bothers you, and oh, it's all fine, or something. And that can happen culturally, I think, subculturally. And I want to say, like, I hope these teachings actually are an antidote to that, in the sense of saying, yeah, when you get to that point of the path, you'll actually be peaceful. The Four Noble Truths will actually be integrated to your experience. So good, but when you're not, actually, I had a friend, one of my very dear friend of mine used to get so annoyed by that point. He still does, I think, but he would sort of go, he would like say, he was part of some Buddhist group uh, in a different area of the country, and he would complain to me. He would say, he's like, you know, he would say something like, I just got a very serious health diagnosis, and this guy Bob in the group says like, well, there's no arising and no cessation, and he's like, F you, Bob. It's like, and he started calling him Ultimate Bob, and he's like, I don't care about the ultimate perspective right now. I'm in pain, and like, whatever. My cat died. Like, why are you telling me about the ultimate perspective? That's not helping me right now. Good for you if you're in that perspective. I'm not, which is a kind of spiritual phoniness or something, and part of, and I was like thinking of and part of what I'm getting at is if you understand these teachings, then hopefully for me, for us, hopefully it's a relief to go, yeah, when you get to that level, then as Ken Shrubsky would say, right? Then if you get even if you get some diagnosis or even if you lose your finances, it really won't matter to you because you're in the ultimate perspective, or you're in this perspective of Four Noble Truths in an integrated way. But until you get to the level, you're not, right? And so other experiences arise, right? And that's normal. And not that there's no need to, one point I'm making is it's a reminder of this teaching also. There's no need to pretend you're at that level if you're not. When you're at that level, it'll be at that level. When we're not at that level, then we have our own experiences and we deal with them as best we can using, as Gabe was mentioning, Lojong, using mind training, using the different teachings to cope and to deal with those things. And then eventually you get to another level where it's a different experience. But, so there's no need to, one point I wanted to make in relation to these is, to me, they're a reminder. There's no need for pretense. It's how you progress on the path. And then when we're at one level of the path, it's one level of experience, or another, it's another, and that's fine. Um, yeah, so that's one point. And then another point I wanted to make, because most of us are not yet on the path of preparation, but I wanted to make a general point. One is there could be use just in understanding this is how the practice works, and you get to this level, and this happens, and that's how it works. But then I wanted to make a more general point because this is true of all the things we've taught so far, all the things we've covered so far, from the four foundations of mindfulness all the way through to this level. Is these, you only have you only achieve the five strength, because here it says the definition of a strength of the completely pure class within the 37 harmonies of enlightenment. That you only achieve when you get to the patience level of the path of preparation. But we can still all practice the five powers and the five strengths, right? And how do we do that? So I just want to go back to a more ordinary, everyday level for a second for those of us not at that point. Is because so if you don't have joyous effort on a certain day, right? Which happens, I think, or you don't have concentration on a certain day, right? These teachings are saying, well, wait a second. Okay, fine. That's normal, right? I'm not yet at the path of preparation. But of course, I'm not going to have joyous effort if I'm not connected to my experience of conviction or faith or confidence. So you have to go back. Well, um, yeah, and I'll just share, like, I'll share a personal experience. Just the other day, I was thinking about this myself, just in real everyday life, where I was like, the previous day, I had been sort of cultivating a sense of loving kindness quite well. And then there was one day I woke up and I was like, it's like, oh, okay, it was like I try to when before I get out of bed, I try to cultivate um, loving kindness and compassion, bodhicitta. And I was like, oh, yesterday I was having some experience, like, and now right now I'm trying to cultivate love, and I'm like, I just feel tired, and I'm like, I'm not really feeling anything at the moment. And then I was like, oh, I could have just gotten frustrated, right? But I remembered this teaching. I was like, and I was thinking, oh, wait a second, okay, so I must have somehow yesterday been having more conviction, but today I'm not because I'm tired, I'm distracted or something, whatever, what's going on. I can't remember. Oh, it's like gonna be a long day or something. And so you go back, right? And you say, well, wait a second, what do I have conviction in? What do I have? Why do I have? Why is loving kindness even important? And then I have to go, oh wow, like it takes a minute to answer that in this moment because I'm tired and I'm only half awake and I'm not really. So I go back and go, oh yeah, because all beings want to be happy. All beings are the same that way. The people I'm going to see today are going to want to be happy, just as much as I do. And so you spend time, right? And you go through and then you say, and what's the benefit of loving kindness? Well, yesterday it made me really happy and joyous, and it made me interact with others well. Be nice if I could do that again today, wouldn't it? Better than the opposite. Yeah, that'd be a good thing. Based on, and that's based on experience, not on the experience of the path of preparation, but on, oh, yesterday was pretty good that way. By cultivating real, genuine, loving kindness, it actually led to a good inner experience and then a good relational experiences with whoever I came across. It'd be good to get back there, right? So you have to, and I go over it like slowly, right? Repetitive, which I'm like, wow, you know, there's no other way to get there than that, right? So I have to remind myself and then I was like, well, and why do I even care about loving kindness? Oh yeah, there are all these different reasons, and going through them, and then eventually developing the conviction, right? Okay, that's why I'm committed. That's why I want to commit my whole life to loving kindness, right? Then you go to, okay, well, then I want to make effort at that, right? And then it's like, that's what I want to start to put my focus on. That's what I want to make my main focus today. That's where the joy is for today. That's where, right? And then you start to be mindful of it, right? Okay, so now as I get up and as I give it as I get up and brush my teeth, as I make breakfast, as I go to work, as I whatever, let that be my let my mindfulness practice today be of bodhicitta or loving kindness. Or my point is like, do you see how these are a guide to how do you, if we don't have, I don't have the strength of that level, but how do I strengthen my mind, right? In the Buddhist context, it's through these processes, right? And so it's teaching us how do you do that. And the person at that level can do it at one level, and maybe if they're like the you know, Olympic gymnast or like the cellist at Carnegie Hall, maybe I'm like the one at the local whatever, somebody's house who's teaching cello lessons, right? And say, oh, oh, that doesn't sound quite right. Okay, well, fine, but that's the level I'm at. So let me do it that way, how do you get to the better at an instrument, right? They keep practicing, you keep showing up. And the more hours you put into practicing, the more you get good at a musical instrument, for example, right? So it's the same process. Does that make sense? So you go back to faith, conviction, right? And do you see why I'm getting at these points about like faith? It's really important to go, what does faith mean, right? Because if I say, oh, I'm going to take a blind leap of faith, that's not helpful actually at all, right? It's like, why do I have a trust and a conviction that I'm using simple, right? It could be emptiness, right? Or whatever the topic is, right? Overcoming a certain mental affliction or whichever the topic is that you're trying to practice, you have to go back and say, well, why do I even think that's important? And do I think that's important? And sometimes you'll have a very easy, strong answer, sometimes not, right? Because you're not yet at the path of, yeah. Lynn has a comment or question.
Interesting. I was looking at forgetfulness and the antidote is mindfulness. Um, in the early days of HIV, um, the scientists thought that people with HIV or AIDS actually forgot things, that was one of the symptoms. And as they did science, they did more investigation. They found that people were very anxious who had HIV or AIDS. So they couldn't bring things into their short-term memory to get a long-term memory. So it was really a function of anxiety, a lack of mindfulness rather than forgetfulness, which I think is just fascinating.
That is fast.
Because it's true for all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Could people hear what Lynn was saying online? Lynn was pointing, she was giving the example from the early days of the AIDS crisis, in which uh, it was thought initially that people with AIDS had trouble with memory. I mean, sorry, trouble with forgetting, memory and forgetting. But then, as they did scientific studies, what they found was that actually people with those folks were anxious, and therefore things weren't getting their short-term memory wasn't working as well because of anxiety, and therefore it wasn't getting into long-term memory, and then they were forgetting. And one point that's true in general, actually, is and there is, I guess, one point I'll make is actually, because I work as a psychologist, like sometimes people will say they think they have ADHD. I'll say, well, it could be ADHD, it could be anxiety, because anxiety interferes with attention as profoundly as ADHD for some people. And you have to figure out which it is. Like they could be both, or it could be one or the other. But anxiety always interferes with attention, and that gets to a certain. Actually, just because you mentioned, I'll say something too, which is it's really interesting. Like there's an implication there actually, right? Which is that for us, one is it's true in general, right? That at one point is that in general, anxiety or worry both interfere with mindfulness and memory. But then as Dharma practitioners, then there's an important sort of thing to note. And if you check your own experience, you'll probably see this is true, actually. You can check for yourself. But um, if you're feeling worried or anxious in a given moment, right, then check actually, and you'll find that there is uh, it's really hard to stay mindful. And then if you cultivate mindfulness, it decreases anxiety. Is one point. That's actually well shown in the research. That mindfulness is one of the things recommended for anxiety. It's good scientific research for that. And then there's another implication, which I think is interesting, is um, if you check, actually, it's really hard to have it's very hard to have a visceral experience of any point of the Dharma while feeling anxious, actually, because your body and mind are in anxiety, right? Which means they're not in uh, a state of, say, compassion or concentration or understanding empty, and and so actually, if you think of going back to your point, because you were taking it from the what's called discordant classes, is actually uh, anxiety would be a discordant class to mindfulness, right? So because it's a kind of forgetfulness, right? It's connected to forgetfulness. And so actually interesting one point would be, so for somebody who has the five powers would never feel anxious during meditation. Somebody who has the five strengths would never feel anxious at all, right? They wouldn't have anxiety. They wouldn't be, or it wouldn't arise for them. Before those levels, we do. And another thing, though, is that then, so also for anybody, actually, if we're trying to cultivate, say, an experience of any aspect of the path, whether it be faith or love or, concentration, if you're feeling, say, anxious or worried, you have to address that first, don't you? Like, or it won't, I mean, or through the meditation, use the meditation, but you have to address that either somehow, or you won't be able to cultivate whatever you're trying to cultivate on the path. Because while you're in a state of anxiety, you can't, at the same moment, um, it'll be challenging, let's say, because it's a distracting factor. It's a discordant factor. And so, you could use mindfulness or you could use some other strategy, but you get the point. So I think your point is quite profound in that way. Oh, and John.
Yeah, thank you. More than once I've looked at those four stages of the path of preparation, trying to understand them clearly. And particularly, I got hung up on the on that patience stage, trying to understand what was being said. And I'm not certain I'm recollecting correctly, but I think that part of it had to do with, aside from those first two stages, which are kind of easy to understand. I think, just in terms of, you know, having patience with regard to when people are apparently making you angry and things. But that third stage of patience or forbearance, at least according to my recollection, it was something like having forbearance toward the fear of, and as I was understanding what you were saying earlier, when, your friend was kind of perturbed, when his other friend was saying that, you shouldn't get upset about this, despite the fact that you got a very serious health diagnosis. And my sense is that, and tell me if you think this is on the right track, that kind of forbearance or that kind of patience is a forbearance not toward acknowledging the truth of the teachings, so that if we don't have forbearance or we don't have patience, it's an indication that our patience with regard to acknowledging the truth of the teachings still needs development, so that we overcome any kind of fear about acknowledging the parts of the teachings that um, that are countered by our continuing attachment to things. Like, for example, the health of the body, even though we have to recognize, that being something that's produced by mental afflictions and karma will wear out and will eventually die. So that kind of forbearance apparently is just acknowledging that and keeping a calm state of mind despite that.
I'll say a couple quick points. One is, I mean, so the three types of patients that, that's what you're referring to here, right? Those three types of patients. I'll make a couple points. One point is that, I mean, they're not unique to the path of preparation. Those, you start practicing those now at any point, and then you practice them all the way up to Buddhahood, and they're among the six perfections. So they're practiced, from we all should start practicing them to whatever extent we can, and then you practice them all the way up to Buddhahood. That's one point. And then so that third type. Well, I guess one point though is, I've heard people say that point about fear, but actually, I looked at that was one double. You said, is it fear? But I looked in the Bodhisattva Bhumi and in the Lamrim, Tsongkhapa's Lamrim, and in also Khenpo Rinpoche's text on it, teaching on it, and none of those mention fear specifically. So there's, um, I guess fear could be, I mean, in theory, could be one of the obstacles to it, but none of the major, like when they actually give commentary explaining what is that third type of patience, they don't specifically mention fear. What they talk about here, I'll read Tsongkhapa. He says, this patience it's a certitude about the teachings, me, uh, yeah, that kind of forbearance is a conviction that is a certitude.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, which is, and that conviction becomes a certitude by thinking about them again and again and apprehending them without conflict. So, that's what he says. And then the Bodhisattva Bhumi, which is where he took that from, really, I think he says that, they talk about it as a forbearance or a patience that is a conviction gained by repeatedly reflecting on things as they are. It arises from repeatedly, carefully considering the nature of things. It is a recognition. It is a great patience that arises from repeatedly, essentially repeatedly recognizing the nature of things. And then there they talk about it as I think it's interesting also. The Bodhisattva Bhumi says it is a form of wisdom. So that this actual this third type of patience, the Bodhisattva Bhumi actually, so Asanga says it's a kind of wisdom that is a correct discernment. So they don't specifically say. I mean, it could, with regards to emptiness. I think sometimes I think people raise the point about fear because there is that point before one realizes emptiness, where some people, as they start to go into an experience of emptiness, do get scared, and sort of pull back, and that's normal. That's part of the process sometimes. But um, But that's just one, it's much more general. I guess what the Bodhisattva Bhumi and Lama Tsongkhapa are saying is that this type of patience is a much more general thing to cultivate. That specifically is a kind of certitude, confidence, clarity, wisdom that really discerns something, and also, I think it's pretty clear that it's a kind of and that they don't use that word, but that where it's a certainty, but it's also a kind of integration or a what was the word you used? A gelling together, a kind of so it's a certitude, but it's also it's a kind of it becomes part of your way of in this case the Four Noble Truths. It becomes part of your way of experiencing things more deeply, integrated into your experience of the world. So that's what that's what those two texts, because I looked back at three texts, the Bodhisattva Bhumi commentary by Khenpo Rinpoche, and then Tsongkhapa's treatment, and that's
And
what
I think you also said that you had seen reference to this notion of fear earlier, despite those scriptural references, right? I don't know. The light that kind of went
that
on
is
for me
true.
was just that, by virtue of habituating yourself to very, very reliable sources with regard to what's true, that you can overcome the fear of letting go of wrong ways of thinking, even when it comes to very significant things like your bank account and so on. So maybe, and that I can kind of sympathize with, but
That definitely makes sense. And Robin, last question, then we'll have to stop. But yeah, or comment.
What comes to mind for me is it's a strong refuge. I mean, it goes right back to the basis of it all in terms of how strong is your refuge, especially at our level when when afflictions and obscurations arise and you have this, mem- uh, an anxiety or a memory loss. I mean, you can't you can't remember things from one day to the next, and it almost seems like one of those old-fashioned video games where you're rushing as quickly as you can to the next thing before the obstacle comes and you can't get around it, and then you keep moving forward, and it's like 4 steps forward and 3 steps back, kind of constant thing going on. You're racing a race against your own obscurations. So and this class today is like it's so fantastic that it should, that we should be talking about it today, because you just never know when you're going to face one of these things where you can't even remember where you are. It all seemed so clear a couple of weeks ago. Where is it now? It's gone. And all of our Dharma lives, it seems like we face these things. And where are the post-it notes that remind us, in the morning where to start off, where to pick up where we left off, because it's all been wiped clean. But so thank you it's amazing. So helpful.
Thank you. And just following up what you said, just to support what you said, when Tsongkhapa talks about that type of patience, the third type that I was mentioning, I mentioned it, I didn't go over because it's not our main topic for today, but he lists 8 objects, like things that and the first of them is what you said, is conviction in the good qualities of the 3 jewels. So it's refuge. That's the first of the 8, and then he goes into others. Essentially which are about what to adopt and what to abandon and what the result is and so on. But the first of the 8 things he mentions are faith in the 3 jewels. Conviction in the 3 jewels.
Can you just quickly
And
say what the 8 are so that we can make
oh yeah,
post-it notes of them?
They're the objects of faith, which are the 3 jewels, the object to be actualized, which are the 2 types of selflessness, the desired object, which are the great powers of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, the object to be adopted, which are the good deeds and the path, the objects to be discarded, which are misdeeds and the mental afflictions, the object of meditation that is the goal to be achieved, which is enlightenment itself, the object of meditation that is the method for achieving the goal, which are all the paths, and the object of subsequent practice through study and reflection. And he gives a whole explanation of what that means, but in the end he kind of says he sides with the Sangha. And he says what that's referring to are the 12 branches of scripture. So, in other words, all the Buddhist teachings, essentially. He says there are different lamas. He mentions another lama who gives a different. But anyway, he says in the end, he takes that to mean uh, patience with, a patient understanding of the scriptures, Buddha. So those are the 8. And there won't be a class in July because of Geshe Gellig visiting, plus my being out of town. So I'll soon send out. We're going to meet and talk about, I guess, plan for August. But then there will definitely be classes in August. So, but there won't be one in July because of scheduling. We'll do the dedication. Supreme jewel bodhicitta, where it has not arisen, may it arise and grow. Where it has arisen, may it not decrease, but increase more and more. In this snowy mountain paradise, you, the source of good and happiness, all powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. I dedicate all these merits, which are merely labeled, totally empty from their own side, so that the I, who is merely labeled, totally empty from its own side, may achieve Buddha's enlightenment, which is merely labeled, totally empty from its own side, in order to lead all sentient beings who are merely labeled, totally empty from their own side, to the state of enlightenment as quickly as possible. And, through this effort and studying and contemplating together on the 5 powers and 5 strengths, may we all have, as quickly as possible, have success in generating those experiences of the 5 powers and 5 strengths within ourselves in order to quickly progress to the Arya paths of the Arya Bodhisattvas. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Lord.
Stop
Thanks,
there.
Lauren.
Thank you.